Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Startup Grind's Ask the Expert series, which we launched this year, and it has really, taken off, and people have really been liking it. So we're continuing. We now have sessions booked all the way through March of next year. So we have exciting content to come. And then, Carissa, if you want to talk about our sponsors a little bit, we'll get started.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to two of our sponsors. Well, three of our sponsors. First of all is TEDCO. And for those of you who don't know TEDCO, they are the major and leading public-private partnership, providing pre-seed, seed, and early stage funding for qualified companies in the state of Maryland. The second is University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I want to thank them for allowing us to be part of their organization. And then last but not least is BW Tech at UMBC. And BW Tech is the large incubator accelerator program at UMBC. They've got about 140 residents and affiliates there. And their mission is to help companies and help inventors, researchers, etc., to bring technologies out of the lab, out of the research, so that we can get them into commercialization. And if you haven't checked them out, I would strongly suggest that you do. And with that, Nicole, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Well, everyone, I'd like to introduce Jason, who has a last name I cannot pronounce. Jason, would you like to say your last name?
Yes. I didn't choose the name, trust me. But nonetheless, having learned to master the pronunciation has taken quite some time. And nonetheless, it's phonetically it's Mantzouranis, and to roll the R is optional. But anyway, Mantzouranis. But typically, yeah, it's actually part of the first morning's challenge is the last name pronunciation.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jason. And Jason is on the board for Startup Grind Maryland. He's a key contributor. He does a lot of our social postings that you guys see. And he's also an expert in project management. So we're excited to have him come to us to talk to us about how to get more things done. And with that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Again, I'm Jason. I have an executive MBA business and technology. I have an undergraduate degree in business with a minor in computer science, certifications, PMP, digital transformation, business analytics, and things of that nature. But a little bit more about me. My formal, I would say formal, because I feel like in my entire life it's been project management 101. But it started in the U.S. and international nuclear industry, continued to expand and grow into the aerospace and defense. And I've also supported multiple startups as a co-founder, advisor, and employee across multiple sectors, whether it be tech, energy, food, human resources, retail, and health. And with that being said, Patrick, you did put a poll question, and was this the question?
Oh, Patrick, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Jason, are you sharing your screen?
You're not sharing your screen, Jason.
I'm not sharing my screen?
No.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry.
So yes, we have a poll question we'd like to start with, and I'm going to bring it up now.
Sorry. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
There we go.
Now, can you guys see the poll question?
Yes.
Oh, good. Now we're off and running.
So I just want to take a brief moment just to kind of poll the audience, if you will, in terms of, how familiar are you with project management concepts and methodologies? And by the way, this is no, just trying to get a feel where people are before we move on.
So the pop quiz is not going to be used, as you're saying? No pop quiz?
Yeah, you have to pronounce my name at the end, depending on how much coffee you've had.
Okay.
So as those results roll in, just real quickly, what are we going to talk about today? So I think the secret weapon is how do we navigate chaos to achieve success, specifically from a startup perspective. And I'm going to touch on, what is project management? What does it mean for startups, the tools, the planning process, mitigating risk, communication, collab, and of course, our retrospectives continuously to improve and things of that nature. So just kind of give you a high level of what we're going to get ready to jump into.
Okay, and here are the results of the first poll.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Got a nice spread here.
We do.
So real quickly, let's jump in. What is project management, right? So, we have all these things that we have to get done. We have all these things that, that we want to get done and need to get done. And how do we discern between everything? So what is our approach in terms of planning, organizing, controlling, and then of course, what are the goals associated with that? So I'm not going to read verbatim. My goal is to go through here. I do have a time limit, as I was told. So, but if there's any point in time, if you have any questions, feel free to, raise your hand or throw it in the chat. So why do startups need project management? Well, of course, as a startup, we have limited resources, right? So we have to be very efficient in allocating not only our time, but oftentimes we're bootstrapped, so money is a concern. And then of course, what help do we have? Rapid changes, right? There's a lot of flexibility in the face of uncertainty, right? As we build our minimal viable product and as we continue to work towards and developing solutions. Deadlines, how do we effectively prioritize and time manage? And then of course, how do we improve or enhance our communication and coordination? Oftentimes we can get too attuned in putting blinders or in our silos and really dive in deep and it's almost the visual, the illustration that comes to my mind, and thanks to Patrick for sharing this, is the circus performer spinning 7 plates, right? How do you keep the momentum of those plates spinning to maintain balance across the board? So it's a constant juggle. So associated with project management are methodologies, and it was one of the first polling questions. So there are a couple of other methodologies, but primarily I put an asterisk with agile, but primarily it's going to be agile, waterfall, and then it's going to be a hybrid. And for those, again, I would just assume that, the blank slate, that what is agile, right? That's an iterative incremental approach. I think it's perfect for startups, specifically with changing requirements. Whereas conversely, on a waterfall, again, this is most people refer to as a traditional, flows more sequential. So you complete projects in order as they receive, and sometimes is in parallel. But you oftentimes see now the trend is that there's a combination of both. So you're adapting the change with agile, but where you're maintaining some defined phases with waterfall. So that kind of helps with some controls. And then I want to dive a little bit deeper because I think it's intrinsic specifically for startups that although agile is really taking off, and I'll get into a little bit more details associated as to why, but I think the 4 values are very comparable and very easy to incorporate in a sense of supporting your startup and things of that nature. So, So Agile stemmed from the manifesto in 2001. You had a number of software developers. They started challenging the traditional processing and focusing on driving value for business. And as a result, we have that. And what stemmed from the Agile manifesto are the 4 values. And these are the values. And these values, although they started off from a software development process, they've been adopted to develop vehicles, medical devices, food, clothing, and music. So the list goes on. And primarily, just to go over individual over processes. This is because, people matter. The success of the project depends on the people, the motivation, those people are involved, working the solution. Also collaboration. And then of course, being flexible. You have the working solution over documentation. Again, this is primarily challenging the traditional waterfall. I guess, you always have to have the documentation. Of course, that's important, but it can't be at the expense of the progress. You have customer collaboration. Again, the ultimate goal of your project should be to deliver value to your customer. It's essential to be flexible and to build those strong relationships. And of course, being able to pivot and adjust and supporting change versus what you have planned. So it's important to be prepared to adapt to changes in the market. Rapid, changes occur. It's important to be willing to adjust and look for the win-win. So with that being said, I just wanted to do a quick poll question in terms of which project methodology do you think would be best suitable for your startup?
Okay, I'm going to fire up that poll.
I did add Scrum and Kanban. So Kanban is a visual management agile approach. Scrum is another agile approach. So those are kind of sub-agile approaches. But I wanted to add them in there just in case if there was others that typically use them and things of that nature. All right, we'll give it a minute or so.
All righty. Okay, here are the results. And I find it interesting coming from programming in the 80s, 90s, 2000, the 10s, and now, that the rise and fall of waterfall, the rise and fall of agile, the rise and fall of Kanban, to and from, and now hybrid, I'm seeing in this group, is the result of all these different efforts at coming up with a methodology.
Perhaps we could create, I was just thinking, perhaps we can create an acronym. All right, awesome. All right, moving on. So when it comes to project management, specifically today, I would say as of recent, there's been a lot of tools at project managers in terms of organizations and what they use. Typical tools you can see outlined here. Trello and Asana. Of course, there's Teams, there's Zoom, which we're on now. There's Slack, and of course, Jira, Smartsheet, and things of that nature. So a general question that I have to the team is, what project management tools are you currently using or considering, and which tools work best for you?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I'm a solopreneur in my development of a new platform for the web and for startups. And so I'm not on a large project management system. I'm not using any of the famous platforms you named there. I'm on a simple rolling clock that I shove targets at myself and wake up the next morning to find them in my in basket, and then work on them all day. And while I'm doing that, I'm shoving more targets at myself. And so, that's it for me on project management. But like yourself and many here, I've been in situations where project management's done on a very grand scale. So I really appreciate what this is about, but that's my response.
Yeah, I use like an agile Kanban methodology, kind of tied in with a rapid prototyping methodology. So like I run small 2-week experiments, and everything is kind of approached from this kind of experimentation lens.
I love it. Love it. Awesome. I know for me, I've pretty much used a multitude of different tools. I'm sorry, someone was going to say something?
Well, Ben responded Trello.
Okay.
And of course, sticky note Kanban, Google Docs, spreadsheets. These are all valid tools.
Yeah, I think everyone just, whatever tools should not be in the way, right? So they should be something that we naturally gravitate to, provided that we put an effort towards, and they should be a part of supporting, driving value in that solution that ultimately that you're working towards. So that's good to know. And tools are always coming out, and I'm always interested in trying out new tools, new things, a new way of doing things. But oftentimes, you try it out. Oftentimes, most people kind of regress to what they've been doing or making use of. And even to the point you were saying, Patrick, for instance, like you're using a tool, right? Somehow you're capturing that action and you have it pop up or visually show you, what you're going to go after the next day and the next day, whether it be a calendar or an email to yourself or something to that extent. In essence, those are tools as well.
Do you recommend anything? I'm assuming it's going to be different depending on if you're a small startup, 1, 2, 3 person, all the way to larger companies.
Absolutely. My recommendation, because from a startup, I think the finance and bootstrapping is always critical. So my 2 cents are to look at those solutions that you would consider, and of course, they're free, right? So you look at, I look at Google, and can you imagine if Google starts charging? So much integrated to Google Calendar, Gmail, so many different things. So, I hope they don't. Eventually, I think they will sometime, because once we've gotten so fully integrated into it. But primarily, my focus is into 2 things when it comes to any of the tools. Is that, what is the cost basis, and and does it help me solve the problem faster and more efficient manner? And so those are just general. So without knowing like what specific use and specific need, perhaps maybe you can share a little bit more detail. I can offer some recommendations. Is it like, is it CRM? Is it a shipping module? Is it tracking actions? Is it planning? Is it scheduling? Things of that nature. Communications. And of course, we all have our own opinions. I like Slack, for instance. Some people, they get slacked out. So, it all depends. Anyway, if you care to share,
I think,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Google to me is, is fine, but it's not, it's got a bunch of integrated, but it doesn't really have program management as far as I know, unless you tell me differently. Sure, it has a common place for communications and everything else, but is it a program management tool?
If you narrowly just to communication, so you have the Google Chat, right? So you have the Google Chat, which allows it kind of mimics kind of a Slack communication capability. You can create different channels. You can communicate, tag up with meetings and things of that nature. So in that regard, from a communications, yeah.
I was just thinking of at a high level, and I don't know about the cost of different tools. I think some of these better known tools like Mondays, I think is one of them, do have some free software you could start with, some free capabilities, and as soon as you max them out, they charge you more. We had until about 4 years ago, we had spreadsheets. The company is 18 years old, and we got 20 people, dozens of projects that we're doing development work for other customers. It was obvious that none of these things were going to work unless we had a serious program management tool that allowed us to connect things, schedule things, the Microsoft project to the power of 10, right? The next steps.
Yeah. And there's other things I didn't look. There's Reich. There's a whole host of different platforms and solutions that exist out in the marketplace.
I really like Asana because their free version has almost everything that you need. And if you do end up where you're scaling and you go from 5 employees to 100 employees, it will scale with the organization.
Yeah, I like Asana too. I'm partial.
How do you spell that?
Asana, ASANA.
Gotcha.
Well,
Yeah, we've got. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I was going to say last year, Startup Grind Maryland used Asana for a while, especially when we were going through a scaling of only having a couple of people in the team to now we have, 8 or something in the team. And so it was useful as a way to first express the big picture of what we're trying to do, and then second to distribute it among the people, and third to follow up a little bit. In the same note, we came off of Asana because we really hit our stride with the interpersonal communication and the just staying on purpose and staying on the task with or without a tool. So I found it very useful to get us through that growth.
Agreed. So irrespective of all these tools, and you know, as you explore and look at tools, I mean, the things that you also got to consider is like, you know, what are your goals, deliverables, and constraints? You know, breaking down your projects into manageable tasks. Can that platform solve that for you? Can it also support a schedule? You mentioned Microsoft Project. Again, Microsoft Project is very linear. And of course, how do you assign tasks? How do you assign people? And I think, you know, a lot of these platforms that we just talked about have those capabilities. All right, good stuff. So project planning, I just covered this, right? What are you going to deliver? How are you going to break it down into small deliverables? What's the associated schedule, and who's actually going to do the work? So that's the foundation of project planning. In addition to project planning, one of the key things, and I think I take a particular interest in, is risk management. So identifying your potential risk, doing a risk assessment to identify all of your potential threats. So this is kind of your what if analysis to kind of flush out unknowns and unknowns and things of that nature. And then what are your strategies to mitigate that? How are you going to address these identified risks? Again, risk is defined by probability and impact, and then putting, values associated, with, probabilities, and there's tools out there that exist as well. And of course, oftentimes we kind of get away with this. We treat it as a check item, in a sense that, oh yeah, I did my risk assessment and we do have mitigating strategies. But one of the key things is that, specifically for startups, as things evolve and you're pivoting and you're making adjustments, your risks adjust continuously. So you need to make those assessments and adjust your risk mitigation strategies accordingly. I have another question to the audience. How often do you conduct risk assessments for your projects? Can everyone still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I find that interesting that it's spread fairly evenly. The rarely is an interesting place to come from, along with the occasionally. But what I like about it is at least everyone here today knows what risk management and risk assessment is enough to be doing it. Because like
Right.
Jason was saying, it's vital.
Yeah. I mean, most recent news, 23andMe, right? The entire board and conflicted and fighting with the CEO, and it looks like it's in a situation, but that's certainly a risk that could have been evaluated and considered, and a strategy could have been employed, and interesting. There's a lot more dynamics associated with it, but that's the first example that comes to mind. All right, I'm gonna move on. So another key component associated with project management, specifically for startups, is building a strong team. Assuming that you can get help, you have a means to kind of delegate and work, whether you're using, Fiverr and Upwork, or perhaps friends and family. Oftentimes, as we're bootstrapped and we're trying to get things, but needless to say, or even if you're a solopreneur, for instance, like this, as Patrick was saying, you still have to establish, clear communication channels, right? How team members will communicate with each other. That also ties into the platforms and the tools that you use, creating a culture of trust and transparency. And then, of course, how do you facilitate discussions? How often do you provide updates and address concerns and things of that nature? I think these are all critical things that have to be considered in maintaining, a strong team. And additionally, leveraging those skills of the team, right? So how do you get individuals that have complementary skills and perspectives? So having that diversity, how do you encourage teamwork and cooperation? And then how do you motivate them? Oftentimes people think of just, remuneration or money, for instance, just as motivation, but there are other means, hence stock options and accolades and different things. It all depends on, what motivates the individual team members themselves. And then I have another question. It's a general question. Let me share it. What is the biggest obstacle to effective team collaboration in your startup?
Well, two things, Jason. After I answer that, I'm gonna go back to Bill Birch, who brought up a question from the earlier category.
Mhm.
But what comes to mind on that question is the biggest obstacle in the team startup grind, which I'm a member of, and other groups that I go in and out of membership with as I occasionally take on projects external to my solopreneur.
Mhm.
And that is clear and effective communication with acknowledgement the first time, so that any given communication cycle doesn't generate more that are unnecessary.
So like all right, so three-way communication, feedback, and being more concise.
You're asking me?
Yeah, I was trying to pare it back.
No, for me, it's simply you communicate with someone, they get it and acknowledge it. Done.
Right.
As
Three-way,
opposed to that you communicate with someone, they don't get it, or they don't acknowledge it, or whatever they got, they didn't understand, and it starts generating, at the fault of both parties, more
Yeah.
communication about the communication. To me, that's a lot of unnecessary traffic.
Yeah, communicate. Yeah, it's vital. I mean, time is an absolute critical resource, and and when you have a breakdown in communication, I mean, it's almost cancerous in its effect. It just kind of spreads, and it can lead to, frustration. You potentially lose out on talent. It kind of, yeah. So it's critical. Hence why I was mentioning three-way communication. I think I'm a big proponent of three-way communication, is to pair it back to make sure that you understand, you acknowledge, and there's agreement. So I think it satisfies I think a basic foundation of communication. Oftentimes people communicate outwardly. There's no feedback in terms of how the communication was received and what the intent was and things of that nature. So yeah, totally agree.
So true. And now, go ahead, Nicole.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was going to say, in the chat, there's a bunch of really good answers to that general question, Jason.
All right, could you share some of those?
I was just going to say, we're dealing with, where we have communication happening in a bunch of different channels. So like there's some communication in WhatsApp. There's some communication happening in HubSpot. There's some communication happening in email. And so it's like when you want to go find something, you have to look in 5 different places to go find that comment that you can't remember was an email or a HubSpot post or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interesting because, I mean, if you look at the advent of email, for instance, I mean, that was really, instantaneous communication. And it wasn't only to the later in which we have these, WhatsApp, Google Chat, Slack, and things of that nature. And I think you see an evolution, whereas kind of, I would say, texting. So you're texting, via your mobile, via WhatsApp, Slack, and I think I look at those as kind of a text communication, and whereas I look at email as almost the electronic version of a mail. So it's more of like a formality or a message. But some organizations operate email. Some people operate as email, like I'll email like, Nicole, please call me. Like, to me, in order to reach out to you, I would have sent that through a different channel versus email. Email, I look at like, announcements, like I said, more formalized. But again, that's just my 2 cents. So I'm just interested to hear what others think.
Well, let's read some of these ones in the comments.
Yeah.
I'll go through these. So limited number of team members with a large number of expertise requirements, from Ben. Bill, amount of system access to grant. I think we've all been there.
Definitely.
Matt said effective collaboration between different team members, specialization, zooming in on work stream specific communication, but also zooming out so all people get the goals, vision, and collaboration points.
Well
Yeah,
said,
it's
Matt.
like being the CEO and holding that vision for everybody while still being able to zoom in and say, well, you need to do this task.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's also kind of, I was going to say Scrum Master, it's project planning, defining what the end result is to make sure that there's a connection to continuously tie it back to see what part each player plays in the grand scheme of things. But the very first, could you read the first comment though about,
From Stan?
yeah.
Yeah, Stan really nailed one of them. Remote is really an obstacle.
Yeah, it's interesting because right now, the RTO, the return to work, has been, been much talked about. I would say generally probably within the last 8 or 9 months. We saw something we've never experienced and never saw before. We saw a global pandemic, and at the same time, during this global pandemic, you start seeing a lot of financial results from publicly traded companies that are just kept achieving a tremendous amount of new highs and new targets, and so financially robust. It looked like a remote was the solution. But as we've gone back and you're starting to see a hybrid, I am starting to see a bit of friction in the remote versus on-site, in the connectivity. So it looks like if everyone's remote, it looks like there was a more of a unison approach, and it seemed like, and don't get me wrong, I think either, both have the challenges and so forth, but I think it all depends on the culture of each organization, and also the type of work that you're doing. Whether if we're in a garage and we're creating the Apple One, for instance, you can't do too much. But if, for instance, if Woz was remote, with capabilities, could we get on a video chat and show Woz exactly on the printed circuit board what needed to be adjusted or changed to help out with Apple One? I don't know. I'm just fictitiously throwing things out there as a concern, but it all. I don't think there's a right answer for each
Well,
that
Jason,
applies to everyone.
you touched on one that Bill also brought to our attention, which is trust of outside developers. And, I look at that and think, wait a minute, sometimes I'm an outside developer for a project. And you're right. How to accelerate that trust if it's due so that the project gets up to speed.
So I have an experience as well, especially with, over the sea talent and engineering resources and things of that nature. I think it's critical when you want to establish trust. I think it's being intentional and creating smaller goals along the way, so that you can work the track to see if that trust actually starts to develop, or you start immediately seeing red flags. And again, getting not creating a goal just by yourself, but together with that resource, creating a goal and saying, okay, I need you to deliver, I don't know, maybe an engineering analysis, or whatever the deliverable is, continuously to break down that work breakdown structure, continuing to break it down to even something smaller, because I was advising a particular founder of a startup in which they lost a significant amount of money. They were dealing with someone abroad, helping out with engineering, and just you got to know when to quit digging, when you're in a hole, and sometimes it becomes a bit difficult. But I think if you it does take a little bit more work up front. I know people think it's easier because you're pushing the work onto someone else, but oftentimes I find out that, and again, this is generally speaking, that oftentimes that when you do outsource the work, assuming you can do it yourself, you're going to be a little bit more critical. But if it's work, if it's like an analysis in which you can't perform yourself, if it's a skill set you don't have, that becomes a little bit a little bit of concerning, because how do you trust it? But to establish trust, I think establishing those small goals up front and working towards those goals to make sure that you're headed in a positive trajectory that you want to go with. So again, being more agile, up front. Does that make sense?
I find
that
that
really
having
does.
those find having those like frequent check-ins, like in the beginning of working with a project with someone, I might meet with them sometimes every day in the beginning of a project for at least 15 minutes, just to check in and make sure they don't have questions. And then we move to like weekly. The other thing you talked a little bit about kind of using overseas resources. And I've used several overseas development teams and call centers. And what I find is the most effective is when you're communicating in the person's first language. So like we have an Indian development team, but we also have several Indians here who speak 5 Indian languages, so they can communicate directly. And so we don't have a lot of loss of communication that way.
I've done plenty of work in India myself. Yeah. I mean, not just as call out India, but just as an example, right? So,
Yeah, of course, I've also like South Africa and
yeah,
Thailand as well.
yeah, for sure.
Well, Jason, what you were just saying really makes so much sense, and that example from Nicole was perfect because Bill Birch had earlier asked from our earlier risk examination of what are the risk categories for a project manager. And I thought, well, gosh, what we're discussing right now is some of these risks of how well are you confronting and dealing with the very concerns that were just brought up. And this is really a story of one of the stories of why Waterfall gave way to Agile, because of the risk in trying to plan it all out from the beginning and expecting it all just roll downhill the way you thought.
Right, because of the evolution of the changes, it's inevitable. So your risks are going to change, and I think when you're doing risk management, to go back to Bill, to your comment is that you're not doing risk management as a silo. You need to get you have to have others weigh in on this, so that because there's going to be considerations, and it all depends on what your product and or service, what your deliverable is, right? There could be something unbeknownst to you. There could be a change in state or regulatory regulations associated with the type of business that you're trying to provide. There could be some licensing requirements. It could be a competitor that you're unaware of, or it could be a whole host of things. These are the things that, again, it's to really flush out all those what ifs. But to the point that Patrick just made, are you going to employ outside resources to help with your solution? What are the risks associated with that? Breakdown in communications, losing trust, things of that nature, having to change who your partner is, etc. Right?
I like the simplicity of that. Sit down and list all the things that could possibly go wrong before you start. Ouch.
I mean, yeah.
Well, Ben brought up regarding the obstacles we were talking about, that project task communications get muddled in with the other daily operations, where you may have a number of things you have to do just to keep operations running, and now you're also running a project alongside of it to maybe make a change, make an expansion, correct a wrong or something.
Yeah, it goes back to the illustration that I brought from you, Patrick, is that spinning these plates, right? So the project planning component is where do you get the greatest amount of juice with the least amount of squeeze? So being able to focus in efficiently, and again, whether it be the tools, platforms, or whomever you're working with, it's very, very critical to be conscientious of time. I think time, when we're young, time is almost immeasurable resource. But as we get older, it becomes less and less. So it becomes more and more critical. And then, of course, if you're focusing your own individual time into developing a solution, I think it tightens down the reins, if you will. It becomes even more critical. So, but needless to say, these are great conversations. These are great things to consider. And one of the things is that, in addition to, and kind of segueing, is that, well, as we're delivering and we're making adjustments, and we're trying to maintain positive trajectory and things of that nature, we're constantly learning, right? We're adapting, which takes me to the next slide, for instance. So, and I know it says post-project reviews, but I probably should update this. That would be post-deliverable reviews, because you could have multiple deliverables associated with one particular project. So just looking for areas for improvement, doing your retrospectives, and your lessons learned, right? What were the insights from past projects that you need to consider for future endeavors? And then, I mentioned about, industry trends as a risk, right? How do you keep abreast of new project management methodologies? There could be something new. And of course, I touched this on as well. There's could be new tools, right? One of the new tools that we're starting to see now is AI. So we didn't touch too much on it, but you're starting to see AI recording capabilities, fireflies and things of that autopilot, and one of the things that they're doing is that they're kind of getting into the gray area of project management as well, because not only are they capturing what each participant partakes on a virtual meeting, but it's also extrapolating action items, right? So it's kind of getting into that little bit of a project management space. So there's always going to be an evolution and a nuance associated with developing and further pushing, project management and things, but you just got to figure out what works best for you. So with that being said, I wanted to ask another question to the audience. How do you measure success of your projects and identify areas for improvement?
Wow, Jason, such timing. As you were bringing that slide up, James Walters asked, or made the comment, of course, specifically for projects, and then asked the question, how do you prepare for the human variables in implementation that shift from what works on paper or in the lab to the dynamism of real-world application, whether communal buy-in for initiatives or variables from legislators or stakeholders? So there you go. How do you handle that and then end up measuring the success of it with this stuff bombing you from all sides?
Well, you gotta. So I'll make myself available. I have my personal contact, and I can certainly set up a time offline to dive into a little bit more detail. But I mean, in essence, right, it's input, process, output. So if the output was not something in which you were expecting or not in your favor, then let's evaluate the process. And let's look at all the data points associated with the process and what those inputs are. And let's see, and let's formulate to see whether or not, did you do a risk management evaluation? Your risk analysis, does it need to be incorporated? Okay, well, what do we learn? What changes can we make? I mean, what are those things that we can control versus those things that we can't control? But needless to say, still have a strategy associated with it for mitigating those things. And again, I'll make myself available. I have my contact information as we conclude here. But I just wanted to ask, that's a great point. I just wanted to ask the audience and for everyone else, how do you measure success? Is it just, a contract award? Is it just, being in the black, if you will, or financially speaking, or, how do you identify areas for improvement? Is it just, a customer comes and tells you that, hey, I didn't like this, or do you self-identify? Do you get out ahead of things? So just want to just generally ask poll the audience.
Yeah, Jason, if I could hop in here real quick on this question. And I really feel that on your statement, and that is how do you measure the success? I want to take a step back and say, how do you define success? What does success look like to you and the team? Mm-hmm. And then, and to get incredibly clear on that, and then from there, you can begin to develop the benchmarks, the KPIs, the milestones, all those measurement tools once you have that clear definition of success. And the other point I wanted to make is the old adage that if you can't measure it, then it's not a metric. If you can't measure it, it's not a goal. You've got to be able to quantify it in some way. And yes, there will always be qualitative, I guess, indicators, but you've got to be careful on how you use those in the context of the overall project.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well said, Chris, because if you can't measure it, you can't control it. If you can't control it, you can't manage it.
Are there any other comments? Well, one of the things I wanted to close out, first of all, I want to say thank you. And then I just wanted to close out that I think project management, I mean, oftentimes we look at it as our own individual, methodology and approach to managing deliverables successfully, providing, to be most efficient in providing those solutions and things of that nature. But I also take it a little bit further and apply it to my life. I mean, from project management in the nuclear industry, I took it upon myself to look at and be creative, to create, internal opportunities and that align with the overall company goals in the industry, and try to drive, new technologies and new way of doing things. And I think, you continue to evolve, and you take those lessons learned, you apply it. And I think, again, whether it be, your own respective startup or your organization, I think project management 101 is effective, even in your own life, if you will.